Hi everyone, this is Tiffany with Straight Stitching. Welcome back to our video series. We are in video number 3 where we will begin quilting our quilt. If you've missed the first video and the second video, I will include links in the description of this video. We've walked through already how to piece your quilt top. That was the first video. In the second video, we went through the steps of basting your quilt, where you are attaching your quilt top, your batting, which is the middle section, as well as your backing. And so that brings us to today, where we will begin the actual quilting of the quilt. As a part of the quilting process, it will be useful if you have a walking foot, and that for my particular sewing machine, which is a Juki TL18Q QVP. This walking foot comes with the sewing machine. If you don't have a walking foot, I encourage you to look up in your manufacturer's, in your book or the website for your manufacturer and purchase one. The important thing about having a walking foot is because we now have 3 layers of material, it will become a bit more difficult for the machine to push the fabric through on its own. And so the walking foot helps with that. The dog, what do you call these things? The feed dogs on your sewing machine, they're going to help to push the fabric through from the bottom. And then your walking foot, it actually also has little teeth on it. And so it helps to push through from the top, which will make for a smoother process. So again, this is what a walking foot looks like. When you begin quilting, if you're going to be doing straight line stitching or maybe just some slight waves, a walking foot is good to have. There's also other feet that you can attach to your machine, which are for free motion quilting. And free motion quilting is where you are pushing the fabric through the machine as opposed to the feed dogs and the walking foot actually pulling the material through. With free motion quilting, it gives you a bit more free range in terms of making any designs that you might want to make. But I am going to be straight stitching, as the title of the YouTube channel might suggest. I personally prefer the straight stitching, at least this point in my quilting career, because I'm guaranteed that it's going to have a design that I actually like, as opposed to free motion quilting, where I don't honestly have that down very well. So I kind of shy away from doing that. You spend all of the time putting your quilt top together. And for me, I know that with the straight line stitching or straight line quilting, I'm going to end up with a product that I like and I am proud of. But I am working on the free motion quilting. So perhaps I'll make some videos and we can learn how to perfect those skills together. So at this point, I am going to take off the 1/4 inch foot that I have on the machine. That is the foot that I use to put together the actual quilt top. I'm going to take that off and attach the walking foot. I'm also going to attach a guide. So this particular guide here, if you can see it, this is helpful because it allows you to create parallel lines that have the same spacing between them. So I'm going to attach this. I'm not entirely sure that I will be using it, but I like to have it attached just in case I decide to do a motif that would require parallel lines. To start, I'm going to just stitch on either side of the seams here. So I will put a stitch going down the right side as well as the left side of the seam that holds these 2 blocks together. So I will do that starting from the top of the quilt and just run its way down, and I will just continue to repeat that step for each of the blocks. So that is a quick way to secure all 3 layers. It's very likely that once I get all of those stitches in place, that I might add some additional straight lines in just to give the quilt a bit more texture. But to get started, we'll just assume that we're going to do that, and we'll do it vertically as well as horizontally. So we will end up with a stitching that will come down this way as well as on this side, and then the same going across the top of the block. So again, this quilt is 9 blocks by 9 blocks. So it is a relatively small quilt. And so it should not take very long to do these stitches. But one thing that is important to remember is it's called a walking foot, right? So there's no need to rush through this process. You want to do it, as slowly and as quickly as possible, if that makes any sense. You want to find a balance of a cadence. You don't want to rush so fast that you end up messing up your stitching. So really at this point, you just kind of relax and settle in and know that it's going to be a little while before you finish. And one thing I do want to suggest is that as you're doing your quilting, it is good to have quilting gloves. These are gloves that have grippy fingers. I'm going to pause for a moment and then I'll come back and show you what they look like. So these are examples of quilting gloves, if you can see them here. So they're just basic gloves. They do have grippy texture on the fingertips. This is helpful as you're trying to maneuver your material through your sewing machine. It just helps to provide a bit more grip. These I got actually from Amazon, an entire bag of them. They're not very expensive. I've also seen people use gardening gloves because those also have a bit of a grippy or textured tip around the fingers. So either can be helpful. I have found that I prefer these. They last a long time and they're not very expensive. So again, settle in. We'll get settled in and we will begin putting our quilt together. Okay, so we're going to get started. I have folded, or folded, rolled, however you want to phrase it. And I'm going to actually just turn this a little bit the other way. I am rolling my quilt such that I am going to be working with just 1/2 at a time. Start here. This helps you to guide and get your quilt through the machine with a little bit more ease so that you're not trying to push the entire quilt through the throat space of your quilt. Now, I have this Juki TL18 QV P, having a brain freeze here. So the throat space is, it's a nice size. It could be bigger. And again, this is a smaller quilt, so I don't anticipate a lot of issues with getting this through the quilt. So I'm going to line up my walking foot. Again, what I'm intending to do is to sew on either side of the seam here that is attaching this column. So what I normally do is I will go through and do all of one side. So right now I'm going to go through and do all of the left side, and then I will come back and do all the right side. Sometimes I flip and go back and forth on that. There's really no hard, fast rule. For me, it's just kind of a game, and it helps me to gauge when I'm going to be finished. For this particular quilt design, I am going to quilt that same line across the border here, and then I'll probably come back and do a couple of stitches horizontally across the border as well. But you will eventually see that. As I say, we do want to just kind of settle in and relax and prepare ourselves for the quilting because it will not be quick. Another thing that I want to make mention of is, for me, when I am quilting the quilt together, I like to lengthen my stitch. So when I'm doing the attaching or the piecing, I usually use like a somewhere between 2 and 2.5 millimeter stitch length. For the quilting, I use a 3 or sometimes a little bit longer, so that you don't actually need it to be held together, in terms of you don't need your stitches to be um, so small and close together, because we're really just trying to hold the pieces together. And then also, depending on how the stitch length that you do use, it kind of mimics more of a hand quilting effect. So for today, I have my machine set at 3, and so we will go ahead and get started. I also do like to, whenever possible, um, start my stitching like in this area here. You can see where I'm off of the quilt. For me, that helps with the like the starting and stopping, right? So I don't have to try to bury any threads, because I'm actually starting off of the quilt, and on the bottom end I will end off of the quilt. And so when we get to the trimming phase, I will just cut those items off, and you don't have to worry about burying your stitches. So hey, we're going to go ahead and get started. I am going to stitch a few lines just so you get a feel for what that looks like. And then I will speed up the video, and we'll catch up on the other end. Okay, this is the right colors. You do want to, as best as possible, try to smooth out the quilt as you are quilting. This just helps to make sure your layers are as flat as possible. But I will say, I don't stress about that if it's not, because the reality is, once you wash the quilt after you've done all of your quilting, you will get the whole crinkle effect. So if it's not perfect, it won't matter. And so this is what I meant when I said you're going to start off of the quilt and end off of the quilt. If I were concerned about that, and to say if I ended here, then I would have to worry about burying stitches, but that is not the design that I'm going for today. So this will be a bit easier. And so you just really just continue to do this. So I'm going to pull the quilt back and go over to the next block and repeat the process. Oh, that's one thing I didn't check. One thing that I didn't do in my haste to get this video started was to preload a few bobbins. I actually do have a couple from when I was doing the piecing. It's always good if you can preload a few bobbins, so that once you do run out of thread, because you will, in terms of the bobbin, it's just easier to be able to replace the bobbin than to have to um, cut your thread and then wind new bobbin. So that is something that I do recommend before you start quilting. Make sure you have several bobbins already wound. Another thing that I do want to mention is when you get your batting, make sure you read the packaging because they will give you suggestions or recommendations for how far apart your stitching should be in your quilt top so that you can make sure that it stays together for as long as possible. Um, so I think you can probably see this here. If I measure this, I would estimate that it's probably going to be 4.5 inches apart. Yes, so 4.5 inches apart because the blocks are finished at 4.5, and these stitches are a 1/4 inch on either side of the seam here. So that's usually why, depending on the size of the block, I will just do this simple motif where I'm just doing the stitches on either side of the seams. But sometimes, depending on if the blocks are larger, then you'll want to add more stitches in between just so that you have more thread adhering your 3 layers together. If you notice, and you might not be able to see it too well on camera, but every so often I am stopping and I'm readjusting the quilt because you want to try to, as best as possible, prevent drag. And so that's kind of where your quilt might get bunched up in your lap and then it's not moving as seamlessly as it could through the machine, which then pulls and impacts your stitches. So you want to make sure you're readjusting your quilt as frequently as you need to. The quilting is all completed. If you can see this, I'll pull it up a little closer. I don't know if that's helpful, but at any rate, all of the blocks have been quilted. They are attached on either side of the seams here, both vertically and horizontally. And also I've added X's in each of the squares so that there's just an extra added measure of security, so that this quilt should be together for many years to come. In the next video, we will go over the process of trimming the quilt and also making your quilt binding. So that is video number 4, and that is coming up soon. So hopefully over the course of these last 3 videos, you've been able to gain some new information and a little bit more comfort in terms of um, taking the plunge and making your very first quilt. Thanks for stitching with me today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more quilting tips and tutorials. Until next time, happy quilting.